Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization, talking to you about the 5 kinds of failure and which ones to use and be aware of in muscle growth training. And the 5 ways to fail are failing yourself, failing your family, failing your community, failing your country, and failing God himself. Thanks. See you next time. Just kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding. If you fail like this, don't do it. Be a good person, eat your Wheaties, or whatever McGruff the crime dog says. Here's the deal. Training-wise, the 5 kinds of actual failure in training. Don't worry, I'm going to list them all, but don't worry, we'll get to all the specifics and talk about them in more depth than you probably ever wanted to know. By the way, heads up, this is like a technical, nerdy science video, so if you're going to comment, you just don't complicate shit, look, train hard, please do comment. It helps us in the algorithm. In any case, psychological failure, that's a trippy one. Systemic/cardiovascular failure, as usually done by called the central governor model. Local muscular failure has 2 types, target muscle and non-target muscle. Technical failure has 3 subtypes. It has concentric, isometric, and eccentric failure. And then lastly, anything it takes failure, which sounds exactly like what it is. So, psychological failure is the first kind, and that's when you stop a set without really any proximate physical or neural limits. Usually this happens because you are in pain, their muscles are accumulating lactic acid, and that hurts, and you just don't want to be in pain anymore, so you stop. Alternatively, sometimes people have a fear of injury that when they get closer and closer to the limits, they go, oh, I'm going to get hurt, fuck that, and they just cash out and they stop. The most effective hypertrophy training occurs beyond the point at which your average person off the street encounters psychological failure. So, and I've talked about this type of failure in subtype number 1 of my older video on failure. So if you Google Dr. Mike Israel failure, you'll probably just have some YouTuber aptly demonstrating how I'm a life failure. But the second video will be me going through the 3 types of failure. More of a simple video, but this is the first type, same type, is just kind of just giving up because you're like, ow, this hurts, fuck that. So over time, we need to work at not quitting psychologically so that failure is physiological, because then that gives us into that part of the bandwidth that gives us the most muscle growth. Good news is beginners are no good at this, but they don't have to be because they get such easy gains anyway. But as you become an intermediate and an advanced, you need to be able to put your psychology limits aside and really push the physiology to its limits. It really, really does help. What does that mean? It means that as a more advanced lifter, you have a readiness and you regularly practice giving it more or less your all within a set. That opens you up to the best growth. And there's no risk that you're not growing because you're not trying hard enough. Okay, that's the real thing you don't want is, you've gained 5 pounds of muscle last year and you realize that if you just pushed every set a few reps further, you could have gained 7 pounds of muscle. Like that would suck, right? You want to make sure you're doing a good job. And this means you push it, but still with focus, making sure your technique is still good, and rarely ever summoning the super crazy psychological demons of your childhood to help you out, because those tend to fatigue you so much, it's not sustainable. It's a focused approach to failure, but nonetheless, psychologically, when your body tells you, when your mind tells you, hey, you should back off here, this is going to hurt, you go, nope, 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 I'm here for the pain. All right, so that's how to avoid that one, because we don't want psychological failure in most cases to limit us. Next kind of failure, and is another kind of failure we don't want to limit us in the gym for muscle growth training, is systemic/cardiovascular failure. It occurs when your lungs and heart get really tired, and it also occurs when your blood fills with enough waste products that you're not actually able to contract the muscle anymore because your cardiovascular system is what's pooping out on you. The muscle itself is maybe 3 or 4 reps away from failure, but your cardiovascular system is like, nah, fam, we ain't got this anymore. Interestingly enough, the heart and the lungs don't so much have feelings, but through something called the central governor model, if your blood lactic acid rises high enough, if your heart and lungs through other various mechanisms are working hard enough, then your brain actually gets all these signals and starts to shut down your ability to do any more work. It feels like a profound crushing fatigue of like an I can't do this kind of feeling. And even though psychologically you're trying your best, your cardiovascular system and other systems involved are really just preventing your brain from really unleashing the beast. This is a failure that endurance athletes get really good at dealing with and really good at forestalling. And as a hypertrophy trainee, it's important not to be stopped by this because remember, the best growth occurs when you're close to local muscular failure. If you want to train biceps really hard, you got to make sure the bicep muscle itself is getting close to failure, not like you're breathing so heavy that you can't do any more bicep curls because you're trying to breathe super hard and you're just tired generally from a cardiovascular perspective, not at the target muscle level. So what can you do about this? First, you want to choose exercises and rep ranges that limit the local musculature, not the cardiovascular system. So for example, if you want to train legs in sets of 10 to 20, for most people, sets of, let's say, 18 reps in the squat, that'll be cardiovascular limit. Like at that point, your quads aren't giving out. It's, rep number 16, you come up and you're like, you're almost going to pass out. Your quads still fundamentally could push out 3 or 4 reps. You're done because you physically can't even maintain your field of vision anymore. So instead of doing something like squats, which demands a whole lot of cardiovascular input because it uses so many muscles and it moves your entire body, maybe you want to do leg presses or hack squats or leg extensions, 4 sets of, in the higher reps and save squats for the lower reps. That way on leg presses, when you're coming up close to failure in rep number 18, it really is just the quads that are cramping on you. You have, 10 more seconds of good breathing in you before that would be the limiting system. So a lot of this is about intelligent exercise selection. I'll put you this way. If you're doing high rep deadlifts or squats or even overhead presses, the target muscle is probably never going to limit you. It's going to be your cardiovascular system, unless you have an unbelievably small musculature, an unbelievably developed cardiovascular system, and then you're puny and none of this applies to you anyway. Number 2 point of what you can do about it is be psychologically resilient and ready to push through discomfort of local failure, right? Push to the discomfort of local failure. So, reaching cardiovascular failure close, maybe your CV failure occurs roughly at the same point as your local failure. But as you get closer and closer to cardiovascular failure, look, shit sucks. I mean, you feel like you're dying, you're gasping for air, everything in your body says quit. If you're dedicated, you're going to say, you know what, fuck that. Another rep. I got another rep. And until my muscle gives out, I'm not stopping, or until I get as close as I want to failure, I'm not stopping at the local muscle level. Last point, this is a huge one, get leaner. If you store a lot of body fat, your cardiovascular system has to operate that shit, keep it alive, and your muscles. And it splits the difference. And it turns out your muscles can really outpace your CV, and that it's always a limiting factor. If you're leaner, and some of you may have noticed this, as you've gotten leaner in your training programs, you're like, holy shit, my endurance is fucking amazing. And then you're failing at the muscular level for the first time in a while. And you're like, I can do high rep squats and my quads actually give out versus doing high rep squats and my soul gives out. So getting leaner is a big deal. Now, if you're already generally lean, 10 to 15% and lower, you're fine. Getting leaner is not really going to do anything. But if you're in the 20s to 30s somewhere percent body fat, getting leaner is an easy, surefire way to increase your overall endurance and to make sure your muscles become more of a limiting factor rather than the rest of you. Next, local muscular failure. This is the good kind of failure that we want. This is where your nervous system and your cardiovascular systems are not the limiting factors anymore. The muscle itself literally fails to produce enough force to continue to do repetitions. It's a very good thing because it's very growth stimulating, growth causing, growth promoting, but it has to be the target muscle itself. So for example, in back training, if you're doing pull downs or pull-ups and your lats are the ones that are failing, like your grip feels solid as shit and you're coming up on the bar and you're like, nope, then that's great because your lats are close to failure. They get a lot of hypertrophic stimulus. However, if you're doing a set of pull downs and you wanted to do 20 reps and you're rep number 15 and your forearms are pumped and cramped and your fingers are starting to open up and you stop at rep number 16, your lats had 4 more reps in them maybe. And they might not even be that pumped or that stressed. And you're like, fuck. And someone's like, great lat work. And you're like, I don't know. It really was just forearm work at this point. So muscular failure is great, but it should be the target muscle. If you're running into this problem, what can you do? First, you want exercise selection and technique that makes sure that it leverages the muscle you want to be what's going to fail. So if you're doing close grip benches and your triceps are failing, you're like, fuck, my chest, I'm trying to grow my chest. Widen that grip, arch and retract, and all of a sudden your chest is going to be the thing that fails more and your triceps won't be the limiting factor. Next, use all the technology you can as long as your technique is good and you're using the appropriate exercises, which means if your if your wrist's hurting or what makes you stop doing dumbbell presses, wrap that shit up. Use wrist wraps and all of a sudden you'll be getting 5 more reps per set and thinking, holy fuck, I was really robbing my front delts, chest, and triceps by stopping just because my wrists were hurting. So wraps are really good. Versa grips and straps, shit like that are excellent. Versa grips are amazing. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way. Versa grips, please sponsor me. I don't want money. I just want to be able to say I'm sponsored. Amazing. Chalk is super awesome. And when necessary, use them. Look, when not necessary, don't do the shit. Some guys will be doing tricep pushdowns. I've literally seen this. This is insane. Tricep pushdowns where the only way your grip would be lost is if the bar physically fucking cut your fingers open and blast it out of the fucking middle of your hand. I've seen guys do tricep pushdowns with Versas on and they wrap them around the shit. Like, what the fuck are you doing? It's completely insane. But when you need them, use these tools. They're a really good idea. In addition to that, you can use a belt. If you use a belt for squats, your lower back doesn't give out, your quads give out, that's great. Don't just put on a belt for shits and giggles, but if you use it intelligently, it can work. And I know this is beating a dead horse. If you get leaner, your lower back won't always be giving out on back training and leg training, and you'll be able to push the target muscles much, much better. Now, technical failure, not a very complex discussion. Technical failure is when you can no longer do any more reps without sacrificing proper technique, which means there's no wiggling or cadence changes. You're like curling with a 2-second eccentric and it gets closer to failure and you're all of a sudden you're like, whoop, just trying to do more. Well, those aren't really reps anymore like you said they were going to be. You're kind of cheating at this point. Don't do shit like that. No unneeded muscle use. Right? So when you're doing tricep extensions, don't start pushing your chest into it and doing some shit like that. You know, that's not tricep extension failure. That's like, I don't know, cable dips at that point or some shit like that. No cutting ROM. Of course, we've all seen this is super common. I'm doing squats to failure, bro. And when they get close to failure, they start going, oh, not so parallel and just above. And all of a sudden we're doing half squats. Hard, rigid, strict technique. Do all of it properly. If you can no longer do reps with that excellent technique, that's failing. And it might not look that sexy. Like failing on squats sometimes looks like, oh, nope, take it. That's it. You just fall back down. It's not like a lot of people don't grind during failure because the fatigue accumulation is exponential. So it's like your rep speed normal, second to last rep is a little slower and the last rep just falls off and you're done. Okay, that tends to happen, especially if you're doing good technique. If you're doing incrementally worse technique, yeah, you can slow down reps for like a fucking hour per set, and you're still not doing a good job. And it's very difficult to do all that tracking and progress checking and keeping yourself injury free. Technical failure actually has 3 subtypes. These are kind of insane. Most people have never heard of them. This is, you got to usually get a sports science degree to learn about them. Concentric failure is when you can no longer move the bar or the implement, whatever, from point A to point B. So if you're benching, and normally I would retract my shoulder blades, but this chair is going to fall back if I do. It's like, why does Dr. Mike demo benching with his shoulders forward? If you come up here, you can't do it anymore. Concentric failure. That one has the best stimulus to fatigue ratio. It's very, very stimulative, but not super fatiguing. It is fatiguing, but not compared to these other two. The next one is isometric failure. That's when you actually can't hold a weight in place anymore. Because notice, when you fail, a lot of times, you can still hold a weight in place, you just can't move it any further. Okay, so after you hit concentric failure, if you keep going, you might be like trying to hold it like, and then it starts going down on you. When it starts going down on you, good God, what are we doing in the gym? When the bar starts falling on you, you've passed isometric failure, and now you are reaching close to eccentric failure. What the fuck is eccentric failure? This is a real trip. If you can control the weight, so after you fail to bench, okay, you hit concentric failure, then you've held it. Then as soon as it starts moving down, you've passed through isometric failure. Eccentric failure is actually when you fail to control the weight on the way down. So if you do this, and then your training partner drags it off, you actually never hit eccentric failure. Eccentric failure is when you're trying to control it, but it goes like that, and your muscles just more or less can't match the force, and the shit falls on you. Eccentric failure is super fucking dangerous, super stupid. For hypertrophy purposes, there's basically never a reason to do it. Isometric failure has a real shitty SFR because grinding isos after you've already gone to failure super insanely tax your nervous system. and doesn't really do a whole lot more for your muscles than another good hard set couldn't do better without less nervous system taxation. So yeah, your best SFR is concentric failure, and that's really the one that you should be targeting as failure when you go to failure in your program. Lastly, for the types of failure, anything it takes failure. You basically go until you can't keep going. And by go, we're using a real general term here because, yeah, you're moving, something's happening. Often this occurs with eccentric failure, but without the technique preservation. So the whole exercise ends in just a general collapse of your body. People walking by you doing this might be like, is that person having a seizure or are they working out? It's very unclear. It has a few really big downsides. First, you can't track it because, how do you know you say I got 10 reps, but they took everything for me to get that 10th rep. Like, yeah, by everything you mean shit that wasn't even the exercise itself, and you failed in every possible way you could. You didn't actually complete a 10th rep. You completed a 10th something, and then the whole shit collapsed on you. How are you going to track that? Next week, are you going to try to hit 11? 11 of what? 11 even worse reps? It doesn't make any sense. Real trouble tracking. Much higher injury risk. I mean, if you want to get hurt, do shit like that. And at the end of the day, even if you don't get hurt, a poor stimulus to fatigue ratio. I mean, going all the way to the end, when you're unable to move the weight anymore in any fashion, even controlling it on the way down, you have a real poor stimulus to fatigue ratio. Great stimulus, but insane fatigue. Whereas if you just went to regular failure, the stimulus would have been just a little lower, but the fatigue like way lower, and it just makes sense. Instead of doing one psychotic set to all-out psycho failure, why don't you just do 2 sets, both of them to regular concentric technical failure? You get more stimulus and less fatigue. It's a win-win situation. I just wouldn't do it. All right. Recommendations. From all of this, can you design a program that hits failure in every single week? Sure, you can. My inclination is to start with like 3 reps in reserve and work up from there and only fail once every mesocycle or so, but you can absolutely design a program that fails every week. Either way, when you do fail, make sure it's not limited by your psychology. Okay, so failure should be really actual muscular failure, not you just giving up. It should be not systemically limited, which means no cardiovascular limitation or anything like that. It should be your muscles, not the rest of you. It should be limited by the local target muscle, not, when you're doing squats, not your lower back, actually just your quads. And it should be technical failure, which means good technique at all times. And it should be concentric, right? If you have questions, throw them in the comments below. And maybe if you have some good questions, we'll make some videos addressing the common questions. We'll call it like questions about failure training. And we'll go from there. Folks, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Editing time, Scott. Go ahead and shake it. I know you're trying to shake it. Shake that shit, baby.
I did such a little
I hate it when there's gunk and you're not allowed to shake it. You're like, I'm not gonna clump myself to death for some stupid audio shit.
There's like a half an inch of gunk at the bottom.
Not my first rodeo, sir. Shake away.